conversations about rigidity in practice versus free-for-all in yoga practice. So first of all, I want to say that no matter what your specific yoga practice is, the purpose of yoga should always remain unchanged. The purpose of yoga is the discovery of the self as consciousness itself. And that includes a process of peeling away all of our wrong ideas about who we are, all of the projections, all of the getting caught up in a wrong identification and in desire and aversion that's based on the wrong idea about who and what I really am. So the purpose of yoga should always remain as the discovery of the self as consciousness. And now the approach in practice is so widely varied. First of all, if a practice doesn't hold that purpose at its center, then it's not yoga. And then even if it does hold that purpose, what I want to look at right now with you is these two ends of a spectrum of practice. On the one end, holding the way that one does yoga very rigidly. And this is important for teachers to think about, do I need to follow and then teach very restrictive, rigid rules and regulations in terms of how to practice yoga? Do I treat every body the same? Do I give cues by rote and just push people through a choreography? Okay, that's one end of the spectrum, and that's the way that a lot of the yoga has been done, particularly in the West, for the last several decades. Now what I'm seeing is a rebellion against that rigidity, in which people are saying it's open-ended, I can't give any cues, it's a free-for-all, do what you feel. Feel freedom equals freedom from any rules and regulation. Now, both of these ends of this spectrum are really in opposition to the tradition of yoga itself, because the tradition of yoga holds within it an understanding of Ayurveda, which understands that people have different bodily constitutions and therefore different needs. The yoga tradition holds within it an understanding of Vastu, which is that there is an architecture to the body that must be paid attention to. There's an architecture to everything in manifestation. In other words, there are categorical patterns that can be understood about the body as much as everything else in manifestation. And then yoga holds within its understanding the understanding of the stages of life, the ashramas. So what is appropriate for a youthful person is different than what would be appropriate for someone in the middle stages of life, is different than someone who's at the later stages of life, and how practice would look at those different stages is going to be very different. And yoga also holds within its understanding an understanding of karma. And the entire doctrine of karma includes that there are multiple influences of karma. There are multiple levels of karma. So, for example, someone may have a very strong karma towards hypermobility. Someone may have a very strong karma towards hypomobility. And how their body would be dealt with over time would have to address that. At the same time, there are different influences of karma. There is my action, there is the actions of others, and all of that would influence how appropriate different kinds of approaches to practice are. So what I'm trying to say is that the yoga tradition is far more intricate and complex than being able to say either, oh, there are these strict rules that must be followed and everyone must be cued exactly the same way and all the bodies are treated the same on the one end. But it's also not appropriate to say there are no rules, there are no categories. We abhor cueing of any kind. The teacher is not responsible for what happens. Let everybody just do what they do based on how they feel. Obviously, if we hold very strict rules and regulations about how to move the body, how to hold the body, what to do with the body, people get hurt, especially because in the last few decades, the yoga practices that have been done have been largely based in relatively dangerous angles. And so if we say that yoga equates these extreme back bends and handstands and headstands and wide angles that yoga mats now allow people to put the body into, if that's the standard for what is yoga, and then the rules and regulations and rigidity around yoga is to maintain a standard which in the first place is wrong, is dangerous, is not true yoga, that's a huge problem. On the other end of the spectrum, if we say it's all just about how I feel, what feels good to me right now, then what we're doing is we're creating a yoga that's based in raga and dvesha, that is helping teachers and students uphold being driven in yoga practice as in life by what I like, what feels good to me, or running away from what I don't like, what is uncomfortable for me. If we allow yoga practice to be driven by what feels good, we continue to be held in the kleshas, to use the Sanskrit term that yogis will understand. Because we really need some categories, some ability to look at the body and at life and at the mind with discernment, to investigate and then make appropriate choices in terms of how one should do yoga practice, what is an appropriate angle for the body, what is a non-appropriate angle for the body. If I'm driven by free-for-all and what feels good, then what can happen, for example, is a hypermobile person loves to do an extreme pigeon pose. It feels good to them, and yet they're damaging themselves. But if we abhor any rules and regulations or the voice of the teacher as the one who has some knowledge and wisdom, then we disallow the teacher intervening in the love affair that someone is having with a particular damaging practice, okay? We don't allow the teacher to intervene with that love affair and say, look, even though you like it and it feels good, it's not appropriate, and here is another way to do it that would be appropriate and beneficial to you. So these two ends of the spectrum are both problematic, as I hope you can understand. And what you can think about in terms of a metaphor might be how we might parent or care for a child. Even if you're not a parent, you may have babysat or been responsible for a niece or nephew at a time. And perhaps that child wants to stay up late and eat ice cream because it feels good. And we don't say, oh, it's a free-for-all. Okay, we look at life in terms of categorical understanding of certain things being appropriate or non-appropriate, beneficial or non-beneficial at a given time. On the other end of the spectrum, it's not about just holding a rule and regulation as most sacred. What we hold as sacred is your ability to investigate, to have discernment, and to choose a teacher who has wisdom and knowledge that will be beneficial to you. And choosing that teacher to lay down with trust. Not trust in rigidity, and not a rebellion against rigidity that says I do whatever I want, how I want, because it feels good, but a trust in true knowledge that's based in an actual lineage or tradition that has to do with uplifting individuals and uplifting all people through the true discovery of the self as consciousness itself, which is the purpose of yoga.